Right then. Wait, apart from no, I've got to pour my tea out. Well, I never promised professionalism, so. There we go. So, for once, I get to read something that wasn't written 150 years ago. Or 210 years ago, as would be the case for Pride and Prejudice. The thing is, it was written, Pride and Prejudice was published 1813, so yeah, exactly 210 years. Oh. So, I suppose I might as well get on with it. Doesn't seem like anyone else is going to show up, so, well, they might do. Oh, hang on a minute. I feel like I think the noise gate is not on. No, it is. No, it is. Yeah. Okay then. Chapter 1. Generic Opening. Lacey Matthews watched a replay of her own death, kindly provided by a deity who pulled her soul aside. The vision, or whatever, showed a bird's eye view of her car getting T-boned from the driver's side on her way to work. Well, it was painless at least, Lacey slowly said to the deity. Speaking while being formless was quite difficult. She was more thinking words through a cosmic medium that forced her to concentrate very hard to be heard. You don't have to hold back your feelings for my sake, the deity responded. They had no form or gender of any kind. Lacey felt their presence to be akin to a star, albeit one that didn't accidentally fry her with radiation. Lacey hesitated before responding. Thanks. I'm really disappointed, actually. Dying just as I got comfortable with my college classes and got a sense of my future. Textbook tragedy. Yep. Lacey focused on the vision for a little while longer, taking a good look at her wreck of a car and the lifeless, almost unrecognizable body that used to be hers. I'll take you up on that offer, Lacey finally said. What you described isn't inherently appealing to me, but I finally feel like a whole person, ironically. Even if I can't follow the same path in the new world, I still want to live a life I can be proud of. I want to work hard for something. That's what I like to hear, the deity bellowed, making Lacey's soul tremble. It was not experience, not unlike being at a live concert. However, unlike the deities who pull living people for temporary quests, or the deities who traffic souls to the RPG worlds, I need extra confirmation. Are you absolutely sure that you're okay being plopped into a far more primal world, wherein you could suffer in any number of ways unimaginable to those fortunate enough to be raised in a technologically advanced country such as yourself? It will be incredibly difficult, even with the boons I offer. Lacey didn't think about it long. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Rightio. Good luck. Everything went dark. Mm. Lacey regained consciousness to a soft slap on her cheekbone. She gasped and opened her eyes, causing the man above her to also gasp before falling backwards. His flinch was so strong that he left her view entirely, and she was left staring at the bright blue sky. It was so familiar that she almost forgot what she'd just been through. She'd died. Her old life was over. It was time to rebuild herself in an alien world full of magic and mystery. Let's see, farmer. No. I guess Lestrade would be a decent voice to give him. Or maybe Gregson. Hmm. How is it that I can read Sherlock Holmes, but this is difficult? Interesting. You'd think something more modern would be easier. Lady, why would you scare me like that? The man cried before rising and dusting himself off. Or did you just awaken me? What happenings brought you here? You a local? I've never seen you before. Lacey found control of her new body difficult at first, but she still managed to push herself up onto her elbows so she could get a good look at her surroundings and the man standing just a few feet away. Are you a beggar? A succubus? She lay in an endless wet farmland of some sort, maybe rice, and there were mountains at a distance. Her simple robe-style clothes, skin, and hair were dirtied with mud. Curious, she reached up to hold a lock of hair out in front of her. It was black. On earth she'd been a blonde. Lady, please answer, you're frightening me. An emotion that I am not conveying very well, but oh well. Refocusing on the man, she took note of his unique face. His skin was dark, but he didn't quite look African. His eyes were a bit narrow, but he didn't quite look Asian. His hair was also curly, almost Mediterranean, judging solely by his phenotypes. Unless he was unique around here, she really was in a different world. Finally, Lacey donned a look of concern and feigned panic in her voice as she asked, "Who are you? Where am I?" Lacey was guided through what felt like miles of rice fields to a large farm complex and situated in a guest room for the entire first day of her new life, where she was questioned and inspected for injuries. Pardon me? The man who found her, who was actually a year younger than her, was Max. Right, yes, I'd forgotten about this. On slappeth to an edgy Max, to be precise, but Lacey was happy to call him by his given name instead of his mouthful of a family name. The specific location she'd been isekai'd to was a farming village loosely attached to a city called Yellowvine within the Tenjan Empire. That was all she could get out of the family who took her in. When she asked, "Where am I? Where's that? And where's that? And where's that? I'm sorry, I don't know any of these names." Though in her head she called them the family, they weren't all related. There were 23 members of the Onslapithuanegi family, including elderly and children, but there were also 24 farmhands who helped with farming, cooking, cleaning. It was Max and his aunt Mia who questioned her while the aunt checked for injuries. Of course, they asked the obvious stuff, like who she was and where she was from, but Lacey carefully played the part of an amnesiac. Mia was suspicious until they got creative with the questions and asked about the names of people in her life, names of places, her favourite foods, what skills she had, and what her favourite clothes looked like. The only consistent answers she gave were that she was 21 years old and her name was Matthews Lacey. She considered leaving out her family name, but ultimately decided she was too attached to it. Her parents had raised her well, treating her like their princess, and she couldn't bear the thought of not continuing their surname even if she'd never see them again. Eventually, Lacey won over some tentative trust, though it wasn't like Mia went easy on her. When Max's aunt served Lacey some supper before dusk, she slipped and spilled some soup on her lap. It took everything Lacey had not to react much at that. She managed not to flinch and just stare at the hot liquid with a surprised expression, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," as if it was her own fault. Lacey imagined that Mia was hoping she would make a big stink about it so she could be kicked out, but with such a mild-mannered reaction, Mia's expression went from inquisitive to just straight-up apologetic, as if it hadn't been on purpose. However, that didn't keep Mia from posting a farmhand on guard duty outside her room while she slept. Which is chapter 1. The first few chapters are quite short. I just need one moment. Sorry about that. I'm in the recovery end of an illness. Fortunately, it's mostly gone by now, but it has kept me from streaming for pretty much the better part of 10 days. So. Actually, I don't think it was quite 10 days. But it's not far off, I don't think. Right. The tea topped up. Chapter 2. The pole farming village loved Lacey. After the first 3 days at the Onslapithuanegi farmstead, word got out about a mysterious young woman with no memories who appeared out of nowhere, so obviously everyone and their mothers came by to see her. That wasn't an exaggeration, either. 20 men between the ages of 16 and 30 dropped by, all of the younger ones accompanied by mothers, to see her. They would walk right into the farm and ask or search for her, at which point the men's eyes would widen and the mothers would nod appreciatively, but the Onslapithuanegi folks didn't allow them to do anything but look, not even speak to her. It got so bad and distracting for the Onslapithuanegi farmers that on the 4th day Mia washed and styled Lacey's hair, dressed her up with a delicate glittering robe that had been stored in a locked box, and took her out to the village where all the farm roads met and the non-farm businesses stood. Mia's sister, but not Max's mom, ran a small clothing store there that Mia took over for an hour. From there she charged people who wanted to see Lacey the smallest unit of coined currency called Jans. It didn't escape her notice that the currency shared a name with the Empire. It was a little grating when Mia's plan worked. Not just for the one day, either. Close to 150 men and some of their mothers, and actually a few gay women, saw her before the stream turned into a trickle at the end of the week. Lacey couldn't believe that all of them were single, and eventually began asking some of them, and in fact, not all of the men were without romantic partners, which was a weird realization, but as weird as it felt, Lacey found the trouble worth it at the end of every day when Mia gave her half the Jans. It didn't seem to be a lot, but it was something. Though she didn't have to spend any of her newfound wealth, because Though she didn't have to spend any of her newfound wealth, because whenever she walked around the village centre, she'd be approached by friendly strangers and usually given free food. Alien fruits, vegetable kebabs, sometimes little portions of cooked meat, a slice of pie. Twice she was gifted hair accessories, a ribbon and a hair clip. Several times she was sat down at a public bench by someone much older and asked how much she knew about certain subjects. That's how she learned about the local myths of spirits, which some people suspected she was, and the know-how of farming certain kinds of produce, and the tales of the magical warriors called cultivators, a few of which protected their village. It was weird hearing a farmer saying cultivators are mysterious. Ah, yes. When she asked more about the mentions of magic to the old man who brought them up, he laughed, saying that he knew that would hold her interest, and then explained that them regular folk were purposefully kept in the dark about the specifics, but that everyone had pieced together a few things. For one, most of them were powerful warriors who wielded swords, spears, and bows, and they could easily perform feats of great physical strength. The few times that spirit beasts, animals that somehow wielded magical power, threatened some of their farms, the warriors assembled and chopped them up. When Lacey asked where the warriors came from, if they weren't locals, the old man admitted 2 of the 3 were locals, but they'd been trained in Yellowvine for a few years before being allowed back to guard the farms. Apparently with the promise that they wouldn't give away their magical secrets, even when asked by their significant others. This was a common thing, apparently, and the 3 warriors who resided in the different farms weren't the first, just the latest. After that conversation, Lacey unabashedly asked everyone she could about cultivators for the next week until Mia pulled her aside, very harshly, gripping her tightly by a shoulder. Some curiosity is normal, she said, but do not get the warriors' attentions. They're sworn not to tell a soul about their business, and they have influence. Lacey tried not to be upset with Mia, because although the older woman could be harsh sometimes, it seemed her desire in that moment was only to protect her. Instead of complaining, she asked simply what to do if she wanted to become a cultivator like the warriors. At that, the woman's eyebrows rose. You, a woman? As Mia explained it, being a warrior who faced spirit beasts was a man's job. She didn't outright tell Lacey it was impossible for her to become a cultivator, but she did stress that not every young man who went to the city with big dreams succeeded, and they didn't all come back either. A surprising amount of them died in training or on the job after being accepted. They were, or on the job after being accepted, they were told, and most were contractually obligated to stay in the city. Nothing Mia said changed Lacey's mind. After all, she had been isekai'd here in the hopes of becoming powerful, though for what purpose the deity couldn't say. Probably something generic like an invasion from another world. If this world's magic system only involved swinging a weapon very hard, she had a cheap boon. Even if this world's magic system only involved swinging a weapon very hard, she had a cheap boon that would supposedly make her time here a lot easier. Studious aura. Lacey could make this blue make a. This is the problem with narration. Lacey could make a blue text box appear in her vision, invisible to everyone else. It only said Studious Aura, and literally nothing else. She didn't even find a trace of what it could do for her, making her question whether the deity's boon worked at all. But her translation boon was working fine, even if it didn't have its own menu, so she gave the deity the benefit of the doubt. Regardless, she supposedly had a boon that would make cultivating easier, and wasn't interested in becoming a farmer, so she was a bit So, she was a bit more discreet about asking where people went to be accepted into organisations that trained in the mystic arts. To Lacey's surprise, Max knew enough to help her. The young man was excited to explain how his father had once planned on becoming such a warrior, but eventually changed his mind once he saw a hint of the grueling training. Apparently, the main recruiter of young men for their training program was Yellowvine City itself, and every few months they opened their recruitment centre for able-bodied people. But he also warned that not many prospective warriors were women, and that it might speak to a bad culture. Max was a sweet young man, who clearly had a crush on Lacey, so when he implied that she should stay at the farm for a little while to see how she liked that life, she wasn't surprised. She also wasn't opposed to it. Lacey knew it wasn't what she wanted, but she just didn't know enough about the world to leave the farmstead yet. She also didn't want to have to leave on her own. Preferably, she'd be accompanied by someone who had her best interests in mind and could protect her until she began practicing magic. She'd been warned of approaching the mysterious cultivators who protected the farms with their superhuman strength, but that was exactly what she thought she might have to do. Chapter 3. Yellowvine City. Lacey spent a month at the Onslapithuaneji farmstead. In that time, Max, Mia, and a few other family members taught her all they knew about their culture and world, though they didn't have nearly long enough to impart their writing system. Her language boon only translated verbal and physical communication, so she understood speech and gestures but couldn't read or write, though she did pick up some of the words. Though she did pick up some of the numbering system, base 10, thank the gods. When she wasn't being tutored, Lacey had primarily spent her time with Max in the vegetable fields, not rice, and performing other chores. It hurt a little to see the young man so smitten with her, but she didn't feel comfortable outright rejecting him and breaking his heart. She also couldn't spend her time helping other men because after the first week everyone kind of accepted her as being Max's due to their close proximity. It was scary, to say the least, but nothing bad came of it. The other young men interested in her just kept their distance, which benefited her because she wasn't looking for romance. Presently, after that month of chores and learning, Lacey sat beside Thenja atop a wagon being pulled by a donkey and guarded by Uru, one of the Pole Village cultivators. Despite everyone's warnings, she'd still sought one of them out, but indirectly. Instead of asking for the cultivators themselves, Lacey carefully asked about their partners before befriending one of them. All the guards were male. One was a single old man who slept around, one was gay with a male partner, and the last was Uru. She didn't want to risk attracting bad attention from the old man, and she didn't want to look like she was trying to seduce the gay guard's husband, so Thenja was the obvious choice. I'm going through the tea quite quickly anyway. Yeah, that's what comes of being ill. I think when I get to the end of this chapter, I'll stop and make some more. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. I mean, if you're watching this on the VOD, then you'll be able to skip it. But it should be chapter marked. Right. Lacey had hung around where Thenja lived until they coincidentally bumped into each other. Thankfully, instead of being forced to manufacture a reason to meaningfully interact, the other woman recognized Lacey, initiated conversation, and asked to be friends. Just like with Max, Lacey enjoyed Thenja's presence, but felt bad about using her. After getting to know Thenja, the woman naturally introduced Lacey to her husband, the esteemed and mysterious village guard, to whom Lacey expressed her interest in becoming a warrior herself. It was a week before the man would take her seriously, but in the end Thenja helped convince him to do Lacey the favour of guiding her through Yellowvine and introducing her to the City Guard Recruitment Centre. As Max put it, based on his father's experiences, getting vouched for by an active duty guard was paramount for a smoother admittance because there was less paperwork. I see the city, Thendra cried with a smile as she shook Lacey's shoulder. Oh, you'll make a wonderful warrior, Lacey. Lacey chuckled and patted Thendra's hand affectionately. Thank you. I hope so too. God knows how I'm going to do a shoe. I just can't do that kind of female voice. Or I can't do an appropriate female voice for that. I'll have to. It's going to be a bit of a stretch. It's going to be difficult, Uru added from beside the wagon, having been walking instead of riding the wagon for the entire day's journey. He hadn't even broken a sweat. The regiment is almost torturous, but don't tell anyone you heard that. One guy described it like that and the instructors gave him hell. When Uru said hell, Lacey understood that he'd actually said the whip, but metaphorically in the same way she would say they gave him hell. Metaphors and the like used to give her headaches with that strange feeling of knowledge being put into her mind, but she'd gotten used to it. I understand, I think, Lacey said amicably. I will take your advice and leave in a hurry if it becomes too much. Good, good. Uru sighed, obviously still against Lacey trying to become a cultivator. Everyone is allowed to leave whenever they'd like, so please do so before my vacation is over so that you may join Thendra and I on the return trip. He reminded Lacey for the third time. Yes, of course. Dusk was just around the corner, but still far enough away that Lacey had no trouble making out the city's details as they approached. Its walls stood only a few metres tall, allowing a decent view of the closest buildings within, which matched the architecture of Pole, but with a more sophisticated detailing on the roofs. Straight ahead, the dirt road led to a large open gate. Only one building stood much taller than the rest, the recruitment centre, but she could barely make it out in the distance. Lacey found her nerves tightening as she laid her eyes upon its vague outline. This was it, the beginning of her magical journey. It all started here in Yellowvine City. After a few minutes, the dirt road that connected Pole to Yellowvine widened as it was joined by the roads leading to some other farming communities, though there were many other farms for Yellowvine elsewhere, and Lacey's eyes ate everything up. There were two other roads, one of which had no one on it, while the other carried an entire caravan that stretched for miles. Dozens, potentially hundreds of pulled carts and wagons covered in and surrounded by young men and women, elderly, and even some children. The very front carts carried recently slain animals of worryingly large sizes. Some of the carts were covered in wool and fibre products like rugs, but most seemed to be full of produce. It made sense for a farming community. Why are the roads so empty except for that one? Lacey asked, mostly just to play dumb. Others could forget she was an amnesiac, but she couldn't. In about 9 days, Pole will also be moving a lot of goods to Yellowvine, but today seems to be... Now which village is in that direction again? Benja wondered aloud. Og, dear, Uru answered, twirling his spear with one hand, out of boredom, like he'd already done so many times. Yes, Og. Thank you, dear. As I was saying, Lacey, today seems to be Og's days for transporting goods. It is a farming village like ours that it is farming villages like ours that feed Yellowvine, though we're just one of many. Oh, that makes sense, Lacey affirmed appreciatively, while thinking about how ironic it was that Thenja, who lived off her husband's guard money, was proud of being part of a farming village. As Uru's rented donkey wagon neared the city, Lacey pursed her lips, wondering if they'd have to wait for all the hundreds of people in the caravan ahead to line up to be processed before they could enter. Lacey asked for clarification. The big gate is for caravans of merchants, just like these folks, Uru drilled, still twirling his spear. The little gate is for us. We're just visiting. Sure enough, Thenja navigated the wagon through a gap in the caravan. Lacey and some of the caravaneers exchanged smiles and waves, and they approached a much smaller gate that was still roomy enough for the wagon to comfortably enter. Thenja stopped the donkey within the gate, and Lacey marvelled at how thick the city's stone wall was. It must have been over 6 metres. Then Lacey noticed that the wall wasn't made of stone bricks. It looked like solid stone, as if it had risen from the ground like that. A door in the wall opened, revealing a lightly armoured man who kept his left hand on the sword attached revealing a lightly armoured man who kept his left hand on the sword attached to the right side of his belt. His other held a thick book that Lacey knew from her month in the farming village was made of heavily processed animal skin called velum. This area hadn't yet seemed to invent paper, or they didn't need to. Origins, names, businesses, affiliations, the gate guard asked boredly. Pole, Yurka Uru, Leisure, Yellowvine Seed. Uru replied smoothly. Lacey looked over and found Uru smiling lightly with his back straightened as he pulled out a badge from his breast pocket. Upon hearing Uru's affiliation, the gate guard's expression focused and he too straightened his back. His left hand left the pommel of his blade and he opened the book to pull out a primitive pencil. Welcome, fellow Seed, the guard said. And the others? Lacey almost volunteered her information, but realised the guard had asked Uru. Uru gestured with his open hand as he said, Pole, Yurka Thenja, Leisure, my wife. When the guard finished writing down Thenja's information, Uru said, This lady is a bit trickier. These travel records might be her first documentation, as far as I'm aware. A farmhand found her unconscious in a field some 40 nights ago, with only the robe that she currently wears. Knowing nothing but her name and rough age, she's a complete mystery. The guard gave Lacey a raised eyebrow, and she waved with as innocent a smile as she could manage in return. Tricky indeed. I imagine you plan to take her to an official for identification and records. Uru shook his head helplessly. Not to the normal kind of official, I'm afraid. You see, this lady has it in her head that she'll become a cultivator, wants to take part in the Yellowvine Guards exams tomorrow. The guard actually had the gall to scoff, but Lacey kept an inquisitive expression as though she were just a dainty little flower who knew nothing of the world, which was only partly true. Wants to trade as we did, you say? He chortled right in Lacey's face. Interesting. Well, what do you reckon I should write on her? Uru replied, Amnesiac woman discovered in Pole, Matthews Lacey, City Guard exams. She has no affiliation yet. The guard began writing as he muttered, Makes enough sense. When he finished, he asked Uru, just in case, Do you know where everything you need is? Donkey stables in? Uru nodded, and the guard let the trio be on their way. Night approaches. We rest at Yobi's Inn. Uru summarized their plans as Thenja guided the donkey onto the city's main street. Despite much of the city closing for dusk, it was still quite the sight to behold, and Lacey couldn't help but gawk at everything. Having seen modern marvels back on Earth meant nothing when she was taking in an entirely new culture and civilization. The packed dirt streets were lined with gutters made of bricks. The buildings were rather uniform, but all still beautiful in their own ways, because while they shared design philosophies, like having a lot of open walls that revealed some interiors, they weren't direct copies. It seemed the city got its name from the distinct decoration choice of painting yellow vines along the buildings, which were all multi-story and rather wide. Lacey had expected smaller buildings than the ones back in the United States, but in fact these were broader. Observing the city's people pardon me, revealed why the buildings were so big. While some were businesses, most were residential, and playing children were being watched by older children or adults. And playing children being watched by older children or adults were common. The houses seemed to be inhabited by more than just a single romantic couple and their children, each being multi-generational or even multi-family. But those were just the people in and around the buildings. On the streets were still many more flavours of folks, some pushing or pulling carts carrying goods, some on donkey-pulled wagons like the one Uru rented, and many more simply walking to their destinations. Some people walked in gaggles of same age and same-sex friends, happily chittering away at low enough volumes that they could hear each other without disturbing the peace. Just about everyone wore the same style of clothing, robes made of a single piece of fabric, shaped in such a way that it was easy to wrap round one's body, and even easier to fold and put away when it wasn't needed. Most people wore robes of solid colours, brown, grey, white, with only slight variations in decorations, which were mostly just a bright stripe here and there. Only one couple wore robes in intricately sewn flowers, covered in intricately sewn flowers, as they entered what looked like a restaurant, followed by a personal guard. "Careful not to ogle, Lacey," Uru said softly after he caught her staring at the couple wearing beautiful robes. "I know it's all new and interesting compared to Pole, but city people don't appreciate strangers looking too closely. Take only glances." "Of course, yes. Sorry." Lacey hurriedly apologized as she remembered she wasn't an American tourist who would probably be fine no matter what she did. This was an alien world full of people who didn't care about her. If she angered someone who had power and a bit too much ego, they might let her off with just a warning, if not cut her down on the spot. Fun adventures and a deity's request weren't the only reason she was aiming to become a cultivator. The ability to protect herself in a world with potentially even fewer civil rights than some of Earth's worst countries was paramount to her comfortable survival, even if she couldn't accomplish what the deity needed of her. Eventually, Thenjo drove the wagon onto a few side streets that led to a large donkey stable. Lacey couldn't read the sign, but an assistant helpfully welcomed them to Yobi's Inn and asked if they had a stable reservation or would like to book one inside the inn. Uru produced a document of Velam with a stamp at the bottom before flashing the same badge he'd shown the gate guard. The assistant thanked Uru and offered to stow the donkey in the wagon for them, so Thenja and Lacey disembarked with their stuff. Thenja had a single piece of luggage, while Lacey carried everything of hers in her robe pockets. Before the assistant took over the reins and bid them a good night. "Come this way," Uru said, leading the women around the smelly stable to the attached complex. "Yobi's Inn is a fine establishment that caters only to those with at least some status," he said smugly. Lacey already knew this from when he'd bragged about it back at Pole, which had a franchise Doggon? Oh dear. Which had a franchise donkey wagon renting location for Pole residents to make some stable reservations at different locations so that they weren't left with nowhere to put their ride. Lacey wondered how it all worked without the internet or some form of high-speed communication. It was probably a lot easier to commit fraud in this world, or to overbook stables. Uru swaggered right through the inn's main entrance with Thenja to his right, his spear in his left hand. Lacey followed from behind. Both Thenja and Lacey kept their hands together in front of themselves, as was custom for women in polite company. The interior was lavish with polished wooden flooring and large beast skulls mounted between detailed murals on the wall. Instead of the usual candle lighting, Yobi's Inn had magical light crystals that softly lit the entire room. She wasn't surprised by the light crystals because Mia had explained them to her, but when she briefly visited Pole's residential physician, whose office had been lit by crystals to avoid exposing patients to smoke. The lobby had a few people sitting around chatting softly, but was otherwise quite empty. Uru walked up to the exceptionist, yes. Uru walked up to the receptionist with his Velum document and badge ready. Welcome, honoured guest. How many rooms, how many nights? The man behind the counter greeted with a smile, though he didn't seem particularly reverent of Uru's status as a city cultivator. Uru seemed to realise the same, but instead of being irritated and getting uppity, his ego cooled. Yes, that was the first time Lacey had heard Uru hesitate. 2 rooms for 4 nights, please. Uru exchanged payment for 2 keys, and the receptionist described where to go. The trio exited the main building, entering a large garden with many long 2-story buildings making up its walls. They entered the building labelled 3 by a large sign. Inside was a long hallway with rooms at either side. They didn't go down the hallway, instead taking the stairs to the next entrance, which led to an identical second floor. At the end of the hall they found their 2 rooms. Uru handed Lacey her key, saying, "Pleasant dreams, Lacey. I'm tired and will retire now with my Thenja." Lacey caught Thenja's eyebrows furrowing slightly from behind Uru, but she schooled her expression before the man turned around, opened the door, and led his wife inside. "Good night, Lacey," Thenja said, waving. "I'll see you in the morning." Then the door shut, and Lacey was alone in the hall. With a sigh, she entered her own room. I had planned to do 5 chapters, but I don't think I can. Because I'm pretty sure that the next 2 chapters are going to be longer anyway. I'm just going to look up. I thought I was under. I might. Oh, no, prepared animal skin. For some reason, I had it in my head that velum was specifically human skin, but it's not. Human skin, parchment made from human skin would be velum, but yeah, I don't know where I got that from. Anyway, so that was the opening 3 chapters of All I See Is Mine. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I plan to do another All I See Is Mine stream next Saturday at the same time. So I hope to see you then. Good day and goodbye.